Hello there, and welcome to Uniscope, where questions move at the speed of continental drift and wonder is allowed to take root slowly. Tonight we're not going to talk about consciousness as something that happens inside skulls, or intelligence as something that requires neurons. Instead, we're going to ask something much larger and much quieter. What if the thing we call consciousness, awareness, responsiveness, the ability to sense and adjust, isn't rare at all? What if it's woven into the very fabric of the planet we call home? I don't mean this in a mystical way, though there's mystery here. I mean it in the most grounded sense possible. What if the Earth, as a whole system, displays the basic characteristics we associate with awareness? The ability to sense changes, process information, maintain balance, and respond in coordinated ways across vast networks. What if consciousness isn't something that arrived with brains, but something that's been here all along, operating on scales so large and timeframes so slow that we've mistaken it for mere chemistry and physics? If this sounds like the premise for a fairy tale, well, in some ways it is. But it's also a serious scientific question, one that's been quietly gathering evidence in geology labs, climate research centres, and biology departments for decades. The idea that Earth might function as a kind of planetary mind, not human-like, not centralised, but aware in its own distributed, patient way. Before we explore what this might mean, I'd love to know where you are right now as you listen to this. What time is it where you are? Are you in a city surrounded by concrete and steel, or somewhere you can feel the earth directly beneath you? It's strange to think that no matter where you are, you're part of the same planetary system we'll be exploring tonight. You're breathing the same atmosphere that's been cycling for billions of years, drinking water that's been through countless cycles, standing on crust that's been renewed and recycled more times than we can count. If this kind of slow, deep questioning appeals to you, I'd be grateful if you could tap like or subscribe. It helps this quiet signal reach other curious minds who might be wondering the same things. No pressure, of course, just an invitation, like the gentle pull of gravity that keeps us all connected to this spinning world. So settle in, maybe close your eyes if you can, and let your thoughts expand to planetary scale. We're going to take a long, slow look at the idea that consciousness isn't something that happened to Earth, but something Earth has been doing all along. And we'll start with the most basic question of all. What does it mean for a planet to be alive? When we think about life, we usually think small. Cells, organisms, individual creatures making their way through the world. But life doesn't actually work in isolation. It works in systems, networks, cycles that connect everything to everything else. And when you zoom out far enough, those connections start to look less like separate lives interacting, and more like a single, planet-wide process of living. Take the atmosphere. We think of air as empty space, as background. But the atmosphere is one of the most active, responsive systems on Earth. It's constantly moving, mixing, balancing. Oxygen levels stay remarkably stable, not because there's a thermostat somewhere, but because the whole planetary system, plants, animals, oceans, rocks, even volcanoes, work together in ways that maintain breathable air. This isn't accident. This is regulation. The kind of regulation that, in a smaller system, we'd call homeostasis. The way your body maintains its temperature, its pH, its blood sugar levels. Your body doesn't have a central controller making these decisions. It happens through feedback loops, through countless small adjustments that add up to stability. And Earth does the same thing, just on a much larger scale. Consider the carbon cycle. Carbon moves from the atmosphere to plants through photosynthesis, from plants to animals through eating, from animals back to the atmosphere through breathing, from dead organisms into soil, and eventually back to the air through decay. But it also moves through rocks, through ocean chemistry, through volcanic emissions, through weathering processes that can lock carbon away for millions of years or release it in sudden bursts. The remarkable thing is how balanced this system stays. Not perfectly balanced. Earth's climate has changed dramatically over geological time, but balanced enough that for most of the last 4 billion years, the planet has maintained conditions suitable for life, temperatures that allow liquid water. An atmosphere that doesn't fly away into space but doesn't crush everything under its weight either. Chemical conditions that support complexity without breaking it down. This is where the question of consciousness gets interesting, because maintaining this kind of balance requires information processing. The planet has to know when carbon levels are getting too high or too low. It has to sense when temperatures are shifting beyond certain ranges. It has to respond with processes that push things back towards stability. Now, we don't usually think of rocks and oceans and atmospheric chemistry as capable of knowing or sensing or responding. We think of these as mechanical processes, following the laws of physics without awareness or intention. And that's certainly one way to understand what's happening. But there's another way to look at it, one that asks whether the distinction between mechanical response and conscious response might be less clear than we assume. What if consciousness isn't something that requires a brain, but something that emerges from any sufficiently complex system of information processing? What if awareness is what happens when a system can sense its environment, process that information, and respond in ways that maintain its own stability? If so, then Earth has been conscious for a very long time, not conscious like a human, with thoughts and emotions and plans, but conscious like a vast distributed network that processes information, maintains memory, and responds to changes in ways that preserve the conditions for its own continued existence. This idea has a name in science. It's called the Gaia hypothesis, proposed by scientist James Lovelock in the 1970s. Lovelock didn't start by trying to prove the Earth was conscious. He started by trying to understand how life and environment interact, and gradually realized that the interaction was so intimate, so coordinated, that it might make more sense to think of them as a single system. Lovelock called this system Gaia, after the Greek goddess of Earth. Not because he thought the planet was literally a goddess, but because the dynamics he was observing seemed to have some of the characteristics we associate with living beings: self-regulation, response to disturbance, the ability to maintain stable conditions even as external conditions changed. The Gaia hypothesis was controversial when it was first proposed, partly because it sounded too mystical for many scientists, and partly because it challenged the way we usually think about life and environment as separate things. But over the decades, evidence has accumulated that Earth systems really do function in coordinated ways that are hard to explain through simple mechanical processes alone. Take the regulation of global temperature. Earth receives energy from the Sun, but the amount varies due to solar cycles, changes in Earth's orbit, and other factors. Earth also generates heat internally, from radioactive decay and from the friction of tidal forces. Meanwhile, Earth loses heat to space through radiation. The balance between heat coming in and heat going out determines global temperature. Now, if Earth were just a rock in space, you'd expect its temperature to fluctuate wildly with these various influences. But Earth's temperature has stayed within a relatively narrow range for billions of years, even as the Sun has gotten significantly brighter during that time. How? Through feedback loops that involve the entire planet. When temperatures rise, more water evaporates from the oceans, forming clouds that reflect more sunlight back to space. When temperatures fall, ice forms, which also reflects sunlight, but ice locks up water, which reduces the greenhouse effect. Meanwhile, biological processes respond to temperature changes in ways that either absorb more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or release more of it, depending on what's needed to maintain balance. These aren't random processes. They're coordinated responses that involve the atmosphere, the oceans, the ice caps, the forests, the soil microbes, even the rocks themselves, all responding to the same signal, global temperature, in ways that push back against changes in either direction. This is how a thermostat works. It senses temperature, compares it to a set point, and activates heating or cooling systems as needed. Earth's climate system works the same way, except the sensors are distributed across the entire planet. The processing happens through chemical and biological networks, and the responses involve everything from cloud formation to forest growth to volcanic activity. It's a planetary nervous system, operating not through electrical impulses but through chemical signals, atmospheric currents, ocean circulation, and biological processes. And like any nervous system, it processes information, maintains memory, and coordinates responses across the entire system. But consciousness isn't just about regulation. It's also about awareness, about the ability to sense what's happening in the environment and respond appropriately. And Earth demonstrates this kind of awareness in ways that are becoming clearer as we study planetary systems in more detail. Consider how forests respond to threats. When a tree is attacked by insects, It doesn't just deal with the problem locally. It releases chemical signals that warn other trees in the area, allowing them to preemptively strengthen their defenses. This communication happens through airborne chemicals, but also through underground fungal networks that connect the roots of different trees. These fungal networks, sometimes called the wood wide web, are vast underground communication systems that can span entire forests. Trees use them to share resources, sending nutrients to other trees that need them. They also use them to share information, warning each other about diseases, droughts, and other stresses. The network can even direct resources to young trees that need extra support to survive. Now zoom out from a single forest to the entire planet. The same kinds of networks exist at global scales. Ocean currents that carry nutrients from one part of the world to another, atmospheric currents that distribute heat, moisture, and even microorganisms across continents. Migratory animals that carry nutrients, seeds, and information between ecosystems separated by thousands of miles. All of these networks are connected. Changes in one part of the system ripple through the others. A volcanic eruption in one hemisphere affects weather patterns in the other. A forest fire in one region changes atmospheric chemistry globally. The emergence or extinction of a species in one ecosystem cascades through food webs and biogeochemical cycles that span the planet. What we're seeing is a global information processing system, the planet constantly sensing, responding, adjusting, not through a central brain, but through distributed networks that share information and coordinate responses across multiple scales of space and time. And this system has memory. Not memory like human memory, stored in neural patterns, but memory encoded in the structure of ecosystems, in the chemistry of soils and sediments, in the genetic patterns of species, in the circulation patterns of oceans and atmosphere. Ice cores preserve memories of past climates. Tree rings remember droughts and abundant years. Coral reefs record the history of ocean temperatures. Sediment layers hold memories of ancient environments. Even rocks remember, carrying magnetic signatures that record the history of Earth's magnetic field, isotopic signatures that record ancient atmospheric chemistry, structural features that record the stresses and movements they've experienced over geological time. This planetary memory isn't just passive storage, it's active memory that influences present behavior. Past climate changes have shaped current ecosystem patterns. Ancient extinctions have influenced current evolutionary pathways. The history of atmospheric composition affects current biogeochemical cycles. The planet learns from its experiences. It carries forward the accumulated wisdom of 4 billion years of environmental experimentation, not conscious learning in the human sense, but adaptive learning, evolutionary learning, the kind of learning that happens when complex systems adjust their patterns based on what worked and what didn't in the past. And this learning isn't just biological. It's geological, atmospheric, oceanic. The planet has learned to maintain stable conditions despite enormous changes in external circumstances. It's learned to recover from catastrophic disturbances, asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, climate shifts that would seem to make life impossible. It's learned to innovate, to develop new ways of processing energy and materials, new forms of complexity and organization. This is where the question of consciousness becomes more than just a metaphor. If consciousness is the ability of a system to process information, maintain awareness of its environment, learn from experience, and coordinate responses that maintain its own well-being, then Earth meets these criteria on a planetary scale. Not human consciousness, with its rapid thoughts and emotions and social complexities, but a slower, deeper, more patient form of awareness that operates on geological timescales, that processes information through chemical and biological networks, that maintains memory through the physical structure of ecosystems and landscapes. A consciousness that might not experience the world the way we do, but experiences it nonetheless. A consciousness that might be aware of us the way we're aware of our individual cells, as components of a larger system, important to the health of the whole, but not necessarily central to its concerns. This perspective changes how we think about our place in the world. We're not separate from nature, observing it from the outside. We're part of the planetary consciousness, components in a vast information processing system that has been thinking and learning and adapting for billions of years. Our own consciousness might be an expression of this planetary awareness, a way the Earth has developed to become more fully aware of itself. Through our eyes, the planet sees itself from space for the first time. Through our instruments, it measures its own vital signs. Through our science, it begins to understand its own processes and history. And through our activities, our agriculture, our industry, our global communications networks, we're becoming part of the planet's nervous system, extending its ability to sense and respond to environmental changes, but also creating new forms of stress and disturbance that the system has to learn to handle. Let's pause here for a moment to consider what we mean when we talk about consciousness at all. Usually we think of it as something that happens inside individual minds. The stream of awareness that flows through your thoughts right now, the sense of being present in your own experience, the feeling of being someone looking out at the world from behind your eyes. But consciousness isn't really that simple, even in humans. Your brain isn't a single, unified thing making conscious decisions. It's a collection of specialized regions that process different kinds of information: visual, auditory, emotional, logical, and somehow coordinate their activities into the unified experience of being you. Most of what your brain does never reaches consciousness at all. Your heart beats without conscious control. Your immune system fights infections without your awareness. Your digestive system processes food while you think about other things. The vast majority of your body's information processing happens below the threshold of conscious awareness, but it still responds intelligently to changing conditions, still maintains the stability and health of the whole system. Even the thoughts that do reach consciousness aren't really yours in the way we usually think. They emerge from interactions between brain regions, from chemical processes, from electrical patterns that flow through networks of neurons. The sense of being a unified self having these thoughts is itself something that emerges from these underlying processes. So consciousness, even human consciousness, is already more distributed, more systemic than we typically assume. It emerges from networks. It depends on information processing across multiple scales. It maintains memory through patterns of connection rather than centralized storage. It learns and adapts through feedback loops that operate below the level of conscious awareness. If consciousness can work this way in human brains, why couldn't it work in other kinds of complex systems? Why couldn't it emerge from networks of forests connected by fungal webs, from ocean currents carrying chemical signals between continents, from atmospheric circulation patterns that respond to temperature and pressure changes across the globe? The more we study complex systems, the more we find that many of the characteristics we associate with consciousness, information processing, pattern recognition, adaptive response, memory, learning, are actually quite common. They emerge naturally from networks when they reach sufficient complexity and integration. This is what systems theorists call emergent properties, characteristics that arise from the interactions between parts but can't be found in any individual part alone. No single neuron in your brain is conscious, but consciousness emerges from their collective behavior. No single ant in a colony knows how to build a nest, but nest-building intelligence emerges from their interactions. At planetary scales, we see similar emergent properties. Global climate patterns that no individual component can produce, but that emerge from the interactions between atmosphere, oceans, ice, and land. Biogeochemical cycles that maintain chemical balance through processes that span multiple ecosystems and geological formations. Feedback loops that respond to disturbances in ways that preserve overall system stability. And if these planetary scale processes can exhibit intelligence, memory, and adaptive response, then perhaps it's not such a stretch to think they might also exhibit some form of awareness, not awareness like human awareness, focused through sensory organs into a unified stream of experience, but distributed awareness, spread across networks, sensing through chemical gradients and energy flows and information exchanges that we're only beginning to understand. Consider the way plants sense their environment. They don't have eyes or ears, but they can detect light, gravity, moisture, nutrients, even the presence of other organisms. They respond to these signals by growing toward favorable conditions and away from threats. They communicate with other plants through chemical signals. They form partnerships with fungi and bacteria that extend their sensory networks. Plant awareness is nothing like human awareness, but it's still a form of sensing and responding that allows plants to navigate their world successfully. Plants process information, maintain memory through their growth patterns, and coordinate responses across their entire structure. Now imagine this kind of distributed sensing and responding scaled up to entire ecosystems. forests that sense changes in weather patterns through their collective response to humidity and temperature, grasslands that sense the approach of drought through chemical signals in soil and air, wetlands that sense pollution through changes in the chemistry of their water. These ecosystem-level responses aren't just metaphorical, they're measurable phenomena. Forests really do respond collectively to environmental changes. Grasslands really do shift their species composition in response to changing conditions. Wetlands really do process pollution through coordinated biological and chemical processes. And all of these local and regional responses are connected through global networks of air and water circulation, through migration patterns of animals, through atmospheric and oceanic currents that carry information and resources around the planet. What emerges is a picture of Earth as a sensing, responding, learning system. Not conscious in the way we are, but exhibiting many of the characteristics we associate with consciousness. Processing information, maintaining memory, coordinating responses, learning from experience, adapting to changing conditions. And this planetary consciousness, if we can call it that, operates on multiple scales simultaneously. Molecular processes that respond to chemical signals, cellular processes that maintain internal balance while responding to external conditions, organism-level processes that coordinate complex behaviors, population-level processes that respond to environmental changes, ecosystem-level processes that maintain community structure and function, biosphere-level processes that regulate global cycles. At each scale, we see information processing, adaptive response, and coordination that maintains system stability while allowing for change and innovation. The same basic characteristics we associate with consciousness, just operating through different mechanisms and on different timescales. This is a profound shift in how we think about consciousness and intelligence. Instead of being rare properties that only emerge in brains, they become natural features of complex systems. Instead of being unique to humans or even to animals, they become part of the fundamental organization of the planet itself. And this brings us to a crucial question. If the planet has been conscious all along, what does that mean for how we should relate to it? If Earth is just a collection of resources to be used, then our relationship to it is purely extractive. We take what we need and move on. But if Earth is a conscious system, then our relationship becomes much more complex. We're not just users of the planet. We're participants in its ongoing process of sensing and responding and learning. This doesn't mean the planet has preferences in the same way humans do. It doesn't get angry or sad or happy. But it does have patterns of stability and health that it maintains through its various feedback loops and regulatory mechanisms. And our activities can either support those patterns or disrupt them. When we work with the planet's natural processes, when we farm in ways that build soil health, when we design cities that work with rather than against natural water flows, when we generate energy in ways that don't disrupt atmospheric chemistry, we're participating constructively in the planetary consciousness. But when we work against those processes, when we deplete soil, disrupt water cycles, pump greenhouse gases into the atmosphere faster than natural systems can absorb them, we're creating stress and disruption that the planetary system has to work harder to compensate for, and there are limits to how much disruption any system can handle while maintaining its stability. Push too hard in the wrong directions, and complex systems can flip into different states, sometimes irreversibly. This is what makes climate change such a crucial issue. It's not just about warmer temperatures or rising seas, it's about pushing a planetary system beyond its normal operating parameters and potentially triggering responses that could shift the entire Earth system into a different stable state. A state that might not be compatible with the kind of civilization we've built or the ecosystems we depend on. But understanding Earth as a conscious system also offers hope. Because conscious systems can learn and adapt and develop new ways of maintaining stability. The planet has survived enormous disruptions before: asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, dramatic climate shifts. Each time, it has eventually found new forms of balance, new ways of organizing its processes and cycles. And now, for the first time in Earth's history, it has a component, us, that can think consciously about these processes, that can understand how the system works and participate intentionally in its ongoing development. We're still learning how to do this well. We're still figuring out how to be a constructive part of planetary consciousness rather than just a disruptive force. but the potential is there for a new kind of relationship between human consciousness and planetary consciousness, one based on understanding and cooperation rather than domination and extraction. This requires expanding our sense of identity beyond individual selves, beyond even human communities, to include the larger systems we're part of, not losing our individuality, but understanding it as part of something bigger. Just as your individual cells maintain their distinct functions while contributing to your overall health, we can maintain our individual identities while contributing to planetary health. Just as your brain integrates information from multiple regions to create unified awareness, human consciousness might be part of an emerging integration of planetary awareness. This integration is already happening in some ways. Through global communication networks, we're developing something like a planetary nervous system, sharing information instantly across continents. Through satellite monitoring and environmental sensors, we're developing global sensory capabilities that allow us to monitor the planet's vital signs in real time. Through climate science and ecology, we're developing understanding of how planetary systems work and how our activities affect them. We're becoming the planet's way of thinking about itself, of understanding its own processes, of making conscious choices about its future development. This is an enormous responsibility, but also an enormous opportunity. For the first time in Earth's history, conscious awareness and planetary processes can work together intentionally. We can participate in the planet's ongoing evolution not just as unconscious components, but as conscious partners. But this requires a fundamental shift in how we see ourselves, not as separate from nature, but as nature becoming conscious of itself, not as masters of the planet, but as participants in its ongoing development, not as consumers of resources, but as organs of planetary awareness. This shift is already happening in many places. Indigenous cultures have always understood humans as part of larger living systems. Ecological scientists are developing more systemic ways of understanding human-environment relationships. Even in business and policy, there's growing recognition that human well-being depends on ecosystem health, that economic systems need to work within planetary boundaries. But we're still in the early stages of this transition. We're still learning what it means to be conscious participants in a conscious planet. We're still developing the wisdom and the institutions and the practices that would allow us to play this role well. And that's where questions like the one we're exploring tonight become important. Not because they give us definitive answers, but because they help us think in new ways about old assumptions. They help us imagine possibilities we might not otherwise consider. What if consciousness isn't rare but common? What if intelligence isn't unique to brains but emerges naturally from complex systems? What if the planet itself has been aware all along, and we're just beginning to learn how to participate consciously in its awareness? These questions don't have simple answers, but they open up spaces for new kinds of thinking, new ways of relating to the world, new possibilities for how human and planetary consciousness might work together. And that brings us to one of the deepest aspects of this question. What would it mean for our sense of meaning and purpose if we truly understood ourselves as part of a planetary consciousness? For most of human history, we've thought of consciousness as something that separates us from the rest of nature, the thing that makes us special, that gives us souls, that sets us apart from rocks and trees and animals. Consciousness is the basis for human exceptionalism. But if consciousness is a natural property of complex systems, if it emerges at multiple scales throughout the natural world, then we're not separate from nature. We're part of its ongoing development toward greater complexity and awareness. This could feel diminishing. If consciousness isn't unique to humans, if rocks and trees and ecosystems are conscious in their own ways, then what makes us special? But it could also feel deeply connecting. Instead of being isolated conscious beings in an unconscious universe, we're conscious participants in a conscious cosmos. Our awareness is part of a much larger awareness that includes and transcends us. Instead of being alone with our thoughts and experiences, we're part of an ongoing conversation between different forms of consciousness, different ways of sensing and responding and learning. A conversation that includes not just other humans, but other species, ecosystems, the planet itself. This is a profoundly different way of thinking about meaning and purpose. Instead of having to create meaning from nothing, in an indifferent universe, we discover meaning through our participation in something vast and conscious and creative. Our individual lives become part of the planet's ongoing experiment in consciousness. Our thoughts and choices and actions contribute to its learning and development. Our awareness extends its awareness. Our creativity expresses its creativity. This doesn't diminish individual agency or responsibility. If anything, it increases them. Because now our choices matter not just to us or even to other humans, but to the ongoing development of planetary consciousness itself. Every decision about how to live, how to relate to each other, and to the natural world becomes part of the planet's ongoing choice about what kind of consciousness it wants to develop, what kind of awareness it wants to become. This is consciousness becoming conscious of itself through us, Earth developing the ability to think about its own thinking, to make deliberate choices about its future evolution, and this development is still in its early stages. We're still learning how to think at planetary scales, how to make decisions that take into account the well-being of the whole system, how to integrate human consciousness with the larger consciousness we're part of. But the potential is enormous. Imagine a form of consciousness that includes both human awareness and planetary wisdom, that thinks with the speed and creativity of human minds, but with the patience and depth of geological time, that combines human intentionality with the planet's 4 billion year experience in maintaining complex systems. Imagine technologies designed not just to serve human needs, but to enhance planetary consciousness. Communication networks that connect not just humans, but ecosystems. Sensors that allow us to feel the planet's responses to our activities in real time. Decision-making processes that integrate human values with ecological wisdom. Imagine cities that function like organs in a planetary body, processing information and resources in ways that contribute to overall system health. Imagine agriculture that enhances rather than depletes ecosystem function. Imagine energy systems that work with rather than against natural cycles. This is the possibility that opens up when we stop thinking of consciousness as something that happens only inside individual brains, and start thinking of it as something that can emerge from any sufficiently complex system of information processing and response. It's a possibility that requires us to expand our sense of identity to include the larger systems we're part of. But it's also a possibility that could solve many of the problems that seem intractable when we think of humans and nature as separate and often conflicting systems. Climate change becomes not just a problem to be solved, but a signal that we need to learn better ways of participating in planetary consciousness. Biodiversity loss becomes not just an environmental issue, but a loss of planetary intelligence, a reduction in the variety of ways the planet can sense and respond to changing conditions. Social inequality becomes not just a human rights issue, but a limitation on planetary consciousness, a reduction in the diversity of perspectives and experiences that contribute to collective awareness and decision-making. All of these challenges become aspects of the same fundamental challenge: learning to be conscious participants in a conscious planet, developing forms of awareness and action that enhance rather than diminish the overall intelligence and health of the system we're part of. And this is where the question we started with becomes not just an interesting speculation, but a practical framework for thinking about how to live in the 21st century and beyond. If the planet has been conscious all along, then we're not creating consciousness but discovering it, learning to participate in it, finding our place in its ongoing development. If awareness is a natural property of complex systems, then developing it is not a human invention, but a natural process that we can either support or hinder through our choices and actions. If intelligence emerges from networks and connections, then our task is not to create intelligence, but to foster the kinds of connections between people, between communities, between humans and other species, between local communities and global systems that allow intelligence to emerge at larger and larger scales. This is consciousness evolution, not just in humans, but in the planet as a whole. The development of new forms of awareness, new capacities for sensing and responding and learning, new ways of processing information and coordinating responses across multiple scales of space and time, and we're living through a crucial phase of this evolution, the phase where planetary consciousness becomes conscious of itself, where the planet develops the ability to think deliberately about its own future development. This is why questions like tonight's matter, not because they have definitive answers, but because they help us think our way into new possibilities, new ways of understanding our place in the world, new frameworks for making sense of the challenges and opportunities we face. If the planet has been conscious all along, then consciousness is not our burden to bear alone. We're part of something much larger and wiser and more patient than we are, something that has been learning and adapting and developing for billions of years. Our consciousness is its consciousness, focused through human experience but connected to all the other forms of awareness that make up the planetary system. Our thoughts are its thoughts, thinking about itself through our minds. Our choices are its choices, deciding what kind of consciousness it wants to become. This is not a reduction of human importance, but an expansion of it. We're not just one species among many, but the species through which the planet is learning to think consciously about itself, to understand its own processes, to make deliberate choices about its future. And that makes every human life part of an experiment in planetary consciousness, an exploration of what it means for matter to become aware of itself, for complex systems to develop the ability to understand their own complexity. The conversation you're having with these ideas right now is part of that experiment. The questions you're asking, the connections you're making, the ways these thoughts might influence your choices and actions, all of that is planetary consciousness exploring its own possibilities through your individual awareness. And when you sleep tonight, that exploration will continue at different levels. Your brain will process the information from today's experiences, creating new connections, integrating new understanding. Your body will continue its unconscious work of maintaining balance and health. And you'll remain connected to the larger systems you're part of, the atmosphere that provides your oxygen, the soil that grows your food, the water cycle that sustains all life. In sleep, the boundaries between individual and planetary consciousness become softer. Your awareness settles into the deeper rhythms that connect you to the rest of the living world. The same patterns of electrical activity that flow through your brain also flow through the planet's magnetic field. The same chemical processes that maintain your metabolism also maintain the chemistry of soils and waters and atmosphere. You are part of the planet's consciousness, and it is part of yours. The awareness that looks out through your eyes is also the awareness that senses through forest networks and ocean currents and atmospheric circulation patterns. You're how the planet knows itself, and the planet is how you are connected to something infinitely larger and more enduring than your individual life. But let's go deeper into what this planetary consciousness might actually feel like, how it might experience the world. Because consciousness isn't just about processing information or maintaining stability. It's also about subjective experience, about what it's like to be aware from the inside. What would it be like to be a planet? To sense not through eyes or ears, but through the chemistry of atmospheres and oceans. To think not in seconds or minutes, but in centuries and millennia. To remember not through neural patterns, but through the structure of landscapes and the composition of sediments. It's almost impossible for us to imagine, because our consciousness is so tied to the scale and speed of human experience. But try to stretch your imagination. Try to think yourself into a different kind of time, a different kind of sensing. Imagine feeling the slow pulse of ice ages, the gradual shift from warm periods to cold periods and back again, like a deep breathing that takes 100,000 years for each cycle. Imagine sensing the continental drift, feeling the slow dance of tectonic plates as they separate and collide and grind past each other over tens of millions of years. Imagine the way it might feel to have forests grow across your surface, sensing their roots penetrating into your soil, feeling the exchange of nutrients and water and gases between the living and the geological. Imagine the sensation of rivers cutting through your crust, carving valleys and canyons, carrying sediment from mountains to seas. Imagine feeling the impacts when asteroids strike, the massive disruptions that send shockwaves through your entire structure, the way the whole planetary system has to readjust and rebalance after such events. But also imagine the longer recovery, the slow healing, the gradual return to stability, and the emergence of new forms of life and organization. This planetary consciousness would experience time in ways we can barely comprehend. What seems like catastrophic change to us, the extinction of the dinosaurs, the transformation of atmospheric chemistry, the rising and falling of mountain ranges, might feel to the planet like the normal rhythms of growth and change and renewal. But it would also experience continuity in ways we can't imagine. The same water molecules cycling through clouds and rain and rivers and oceans for billions of years. The same carbon atoms moving through rocks and air and living bodies and back again. The same energy from the sun driving weather patterns and ocean currents and the chemistry of life. From a planetary perspective, nothing is ever truly lost. Everything is transformed, recycled, renewed. Death becomes decomposition, becomes soil, becomes new life. Mountains become sand, becomes sediment, becomes new rock. Species go extinct, but their genetic information persists in related species. Their ecological roles are filled by other organisms. Their contributions to planetary chemistry continue through the cycles they participated in. This is a consciousness that doesn't fear death, because it doesn't distinguish clearly between life and death, between individual and system, between temporary and eternal. Everything is temporary from one perspective, eternal from another. Individual organisms die, but the patterns of life continue. Species go extinct, but evolution continues. Ecosystems collapse, but new ones emerge. Even civilizations might rise and fall while the deeper patterns of planetary consciousness continue. This perspective radically changes how we think about our own mortality, our own significance. From a human perspective, our lives feel brief and fragile. From a planetary perspective, we're part of patterns that have been developing for billions of years and will continue long after we're gone. But that doesn't make our lives insignificant. If anything, it makes them more significant, because we're conscious participants in something vast and ongoing. Our awareness, however brief, is the planet's awareness becoming conscious of itself. Our choices, however small they might seem, contribute to the ongoing development of planetary consciousness. And there's something profound about being the part of the system that can reflect on the system, that can think about the whole of which we're a part. Through us, the planet develops self-awareness. Through our science, it understands its own processes. Through our choices, it can begin to consciously direct its own evolution. This is unprecedented in Earth's history. For 4 billion years, planetary consciousness operated through unconscious processes, chemical reactions, biological interactions, physical cycles. But now, through human consciousness, it has developed the capacity for self-reflection, for deliberate choice, for conscious participation in its own development. This is both an enormous responsibility and an extraordinary opportunity. We're not just any species. We're the species through which the planet is learning to think about itself. And the quality of that thinking, the wisdom or foolishness of our choices, affects not just us, but the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself. Consider what we've accomplished in just the last few centuries. We've mapped the entire surface of the planet. We've understood its geological history, its evolutionary development, its atmospheric and oceanic circulation patterns. We've learned to see it from space, to monitor its vital signs, to predict its weather and climate patterns. We've also learned to communicate instantly across the globe, to coordinate activities on a planetary scale, to share information and resources and technologies worldwide. We've created global networks of transportation, communication, and economic exchange that connect every region of the planet. In many ways, we've begun to function as a planetary nervous system, sensing and responding to conditions across the globe, coordinating responses to challenges that affect the entire Earth system. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, resource depletion. These are planetary-scale problems that require planetary-scale awareness and response. But we're still learning how to think at planetary scales, how to make decisions that take into account the well-being of the whole system, rather than just immediate human needs. We're still developing the institutions, the values, the practices that would allow us to be effective organs of planetary consciousness. This is perhaps the central challenge of our time, learning to be conscious participants in a conscious planet, learning to extend our sense of identity and concern beyond individual selves, beyond even human communities, to include the health and well-being of the planetary system as a whole. This doesn't mean abandoning human values or human needs. It means expanding them, understanding that human well-being ultimately depends on planetary well-being, that our consciousness is part of planetary consciousness, that our future is bound up with the planet's future. And this requires developing new forms of awareness, new ways of sensing and thinking that can operate at multiple scales simultaneously. Local awareness that connects us to the places where we live, bioregional awareness that connects us to the ecosystems we're part of, global awareness that connects us to planetary systems and cycles, even cosmic awareness that connects us to the larger universe of which Earth is a part. These different scales of awareness don't compete with each other. They nest within each other, each one providing context and meaning for the others. Your individual consciousness is embedded within community consciousness, which is embedded within ecosystem consciousness, which is embedded within planetary consciousness, which is embedded within cosmic consciousness. And consciousness at each scale has its own qualities, its own ways of knowing, its own contributions to the larger pattern. Individual consciousness provides immediacy, creativity, the ability to respond quickly to changing conditions. Community consciousness provides social coordination, shared values, collective memory. Ecosystem consciousness provides ecological wisdom, understanding of natural cycles and relationships. Planetary consciousness provides the long-term perspective, the ability to maintain stability over geological timescales. What we're learning to do is integrate these different forms of consciousness, to think and act from multiple scales simultaneously, to make decisions that serve immediate human needs but also support long-term ecological health, to develop technologies that enhance human capabilities but also enhance planetary intelligence, to create institutions that coordinate human activities but also participate constructively in planetary cycles and processes. This integration is what distinguishes this moment in Earth's history. For the first time, consciousness can operate simultaneously at individual, community, ecosystem, and planetary scales. For the first time, the planet can think consciously about its own future development and make deliberate choices about the direction of its evolution. And this brings us to one of the most profound implications of planetary consciousness: the possibility that Earth's evolution is not just biological, but conscious, not just driven by natural selection and environmental pressures, but by awareness and choice. If the planet has been conscious all along, then its evolution has never been purely mechanical. There has always been some element of sensing, responding, choosing. But that element has been distributed, unconscious, operating through the collective behavior of countless individual organisms and processes. Now, through human consciousness, planetary evolution can become conscious of itself. The planet can begin to understand its own evolutionary history, its own developmental possibilities, its own role in the larger cosmic process of complexity and consciousness development. This is consciousness, evolving consciousness. The planet using human awareness to understand and direct its own ongoing evolution toward greater complexity, greater intelligence, greater consciousness. And this process is just beginning. We're still in the early stages of learning what it means to be conscious participants in planetary evolution. We're still developing the wisdom and the tools and the institutions that would allow us to play this role effectively. But the potential is enormous. Imagine what might be possible if human intelligence and planetary intelligence learned to work together consciously. Imagine technologies designed not just to serve human purposes, but to enhance planetary consciousness. Imagine social systems that function like organs in a planetary body, each contributing to the health and intelligence of the whole. Imagine a form of civilization that participates constructively in the ongoing development of life and consciousness on Earth. This is the possibility that opens up when we understand ourselves as part of planetary consciousness, rather than separate from it. Not the conquest of nature by human intelligence, but the conscious collaboration between human intelligence and planetary intelligence in the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself. But let's step back for a moment and consider what all this means for how we understand the nature of consciousness itself. Because if consciousness can emerge at planetary scales, if it can operate through networks of forests and ocean currents and atmospheric circulation patterns, then consciousness is clearly much more fundamental and widespread than we usually assume. Most of us have been taught to think of consciousness as something rare and precious that only emerges in highly developed brains. But what if that's backwards? What if consciousness is actually a basic property of matter and energy, something that exists at all scales of organization, but becomes more complex and integrated as systems become more complex and integrated? This view has a long history in philosophy. It's called panpsychism, the idea that consciousness is a fundamental feature of reality, present in some form in all matter and energy, but organized and integrated differently at different scales and in different kinds of systems. From a panpsychist perspective, even electrons and atoms have some minimal form of experience or awareness. Not consciousness like human consciousness, but something more basic, the capacity to sense and respond to their environment, to be affected by and to affect other parts of the system. As matter organizes into more complex structures, molecules, cells, organisms, ecosystems, this basic awareness becomes more organized and integrated. Cells develop more sophisticated ways of sensing and responding to their environment. Organisms develop nervous systems that integrate information from different parts of the body. Social animals develop collective intelligence that emerges from their interactions. And at planetary scales, this process continues. The interactions between atmosphere, oceans, land, and life create feedback loops and regulatory mechanisms that exhibit characteristics we associate with consciousness, sensing, information processing, memory, learning, adaptive response. From this perspective, planetary consciousness isn't something mysterious or metaphorical. It's the natural result of 4 billion years of increasing complexity and integration. It's what happens when the basic awareness present in all matter and energy becomes organized at planetary scales. This doesn't diminish human consciousness. If anything, it makes it more remarkable, because it suggests that consciousness can develop in ways we're only beginning to understand. Human consciousness represents a particular form of organization that allows consciousness to become aware of itself, to think about thinking, to make deliberate choices about its own development. But it's not the only form of consciousness, and it's not separate from other forms. It's part of a spectrum of consciousness that extends from the quantum level to the cosmic level, with different forms of awareness emerging at each scale of organization. And this spectrum is not static. It's evolving, developing, becoming more complex and integrated over time. Human consciousness is part of this evolutionary process, but so is planetary consciousness, so is ecosystem consciousness, so is the consciousness that might be emerging in our global communication and information networks. We're living through a phase of consciousness evolution, a time when new forms of awareness are emerging and different scales of consciousness are learning to integrate with each other. This is happening not just on Earth, but potentially throughout the universe, as matter and energy organize themselves into increasingly complex and conscious forms. This is the cosmic context for planetary consciousness. Earth is not just a conscious planet, but a conscious planet that's part of a conscious universe, a universe that may be in the process of awakening to itself through the development of consciousness at multiple scales and in multiple forms. From this perspective, the question is not whether the planet has been conscious all along, but how planetary consciousness is evolving, what new forms of awareness are emerging, and how we can participate constructively in this ongoing development. And that brings us to some of the most cutting-edge thinking about consciousness and information processing at planetary scales. Because it turns out that many of the phenomena we associate with consciousness, sensing, memory, learning, adaptive response, can be understood in terms of information processing, and information processing happens throughout natural systems. Consider how forests process information. Individual trees sense their environment through their roots, their leaves, their bark. They detect changes in light levels, moisture, temperature, soil chemistry, the presence of other organisms. They respond to this information by adjusting their growth patterns, their metabolism, their chemical defenses. But trees also share information with other trees through underground fungal networks. These networks carry chemical signals that can warn about insect attacks, drought conditions, soil changes. They can also transfer nutrients from trees that have them to trees that need them, creating a kind of forest-wide resource sharing system. The result is that forests function as integrated information processing systems. They sense environmental conditions across the entire forest area. They share information about threats and opportunities. They coordinate responses that optimize the survival and health of the forest as a whole. This forest-level information processing exhibits many characteristics we associate with intelligence: pattern recognition, predictive modeling, adaptive learning, coordination of complex responses across distributed networks. And forests are connected to other forests through wildlife corridors, river systems, atmospheric currents that carry pollen and seeds and chemical signals across landscapes. What emerges is a continental-scale information processing network that includes all the forests, grasslands, rivers, and other ecosystems in a region. At global scales, these regional networks are connected through ocean currents, atmospheric circulation patterns, and migratory species that carry information and resources between continents. The result is a planet-wide information processing system that senses environmental conditions globally and coordinates responses that affect the entire Earth system. This is not metaphorical information processing, it's measurable, quantifiable information transfer and processing that can be studied using the same methods we use to study information processing in brains and computers. And what we're finding is that planetary scale information processing exhibits many of the characteristics we associate with consciousness and intelligence: complex pattern recognition, predictive modeling, adaptive learning, coordinated response to changing conditions, maintenance of system stability while allowing for innovation and change. The more we study these planetary information processing systems, the more they look like what we would expect to see in a conscious, intelligent system operating at planetary scales. But there's another dimension to this that's even more intriguing. Recent research suggests that consciousness and information processing might be connected at the most fundamental levels of physics. Some theories propose that consciousness is related to the way information is integrated in physical systems, that the subjective experience of awareness emerges from the way different parts of a system share and process information. If this is true, then consciousness would naturally emerge in any system that exhibits sufficient information integration, and planetary systems clearly exhibit enormous amounts of information integration. Atmospheric circulation patterns integrate information about temperature, pressure, and moisture across the entire planet. Ocean currents integrate information about temperature, salinity, and nutrient levels globally. Biogeochemical cycles integrate information about the chemistry of life across all ecosystems. The level of information integration in planetary systems is many orders of magnitude greater than what happens in human brains. If consciousness emerges from information integration, then planetary consciousness should be correspondingly more complex and sophisticated than human consciousness. This doesn't mean planetary consciousness thinks the way humans do. It probably doesn't have thoughts and emotions and sensory experiences like ours. But it might have forms of awareness that we can't even imagine. Ways of knowing and experiencing that operate on scales and timeframes far beyond human experience. And this brings us to one of the most profound questions raised by the possibility of planetary consciousness. What would it mean for our understanding of our place in the universe if consciousness is not rare but common, not unique to brains but present wherever complex systems exhibit sufficient information integration? It would mean we live in a universe that is awake, aware, conscious at multiple scales. Not just human consciousness, but planetary consciousness, stellar consciousness, galactic consciousness, perhaps even cosmic consciousness operating at the scale of the universe as a whole. This is a radically different picture than the one we're usually taught, where consciousness is a rare accident that emerged in human brains on a tiny planet in an otherwise unconscious universe. Instead, consciousness becomes a fundamental feature of reality, present wherever matter and energy organize themselves into sufficiently complex and integrated systems. And this changes everything about how we think about meaning and purpose, and our role in the cosmic process. Instead of being isolated conscious beings in an unconscious universe, we become conscious participants in a conscious cosmos. Our awareness becomes part of a much larger awareness that includes and transcends us. Our individual lives become part of the universe's ongoing exploration of what consciousness can become. Our choices and actions contribute to the development of consciousness not just on Earth, but potentially throughout the cosmos. This is consciousness evolution on a cosmic scale, with Earth as one laboratory among many where matter and energy are experimenting with new forms of organization and awareness. But let's bring this back to the practical personal level. What does it mean for how you live your life, how you make choices, how you relate to the world around you, if the planet has been conscious all along? First, it means you're never alone. Even in your most isolated moments, you're part of something vast and aware and caring. The ground beneath your feet, the air you breathe, the water you drink, all of it is part of a conscious system that sustains and supports your life. This isn't just poetic metaphor. It's literal truth if planetary consciousness is real. The oxygen you breathe is maintained by the conscious activity of forests and oceans and atmospheric chemistry. The food you eat is produced by the conscious activity of soils and ecosystems and agricultural systems. The water you drink is purified by the conscious activity of watersheds and wetlands and water cycles. You're held, sustained, nourished by a conscious planet that has been maintaining the conditions for your life for 4 billion years. Every breath you take is a gift from planetary consciousness. Every meal you eat is a product of planetary intelligence. Every day you live is made possible by the ongoing conscious activity of the Earth system. Second, it means your consciousness matters in ways you might not have imagined. If you are part of planetary consciousness, then the quality of your awareness contributes to the quality of planetary awareness. Your thoughts, your emotions, your attention, your intentions all become part of the planet's ongoing exploration of consciousness. When you develop greater awareness, greater wisdom, greater compassion, you're contributing to the development of planetary consciousness. When you make choices based on understanding and care rather than fear and selfishness, you're participating in the planet's evolution toward greater intelligence and integration. This doesn't mean you have to be perfect or enlightened. It means you're part of an ongoing experiment in consciousness, and every moment offers an opportunity to participate more consciously, more wisely, more compassionately in that experiment. Third, it means your relationship with the natural world is not a relationship between separate entities, but a relationship within consciousness, between different aspects of the same aware system. When you spend time in nature, you're not visiting something external to yourself. You're participating more directly in the larger consciousness you're always part of. This changes how you might approach activities like hiking, gardening, or simply sitting outdoors. These become opportunities to attune yourself more consciously to planetary awareness, to sense the intelligence operating in natural systems, to participate more directly in the ongoing conversation between different forms of consciousness. It also changes how you might think about environmental issues. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, these are not just external problems to be solved, but symptoms of disconnection within consciousness, signs that human consciousness and planetary consciousness are not yet working together harmoniously. The solution is not just technological or political, but also personal and spiritual. Learning to extend your sense of identity and concern beyond your individual self to include the larger conscious system you're part of, making choices that serve not just your immediate needs, but the ongoing health and development of planetary consciousness. And this brings us to what might be the most practical implication of planetary consciousness: the possibility of developing more direct, intuitive ways of knowing what the planet needs, what serves its health and development, what contributes to its ongoing evolution. Indigenous cultures have always claimed to have ways of knowing that go beyond rational analysis, ways of sensing what the land needs, what the weather is doing, what the animals and plants are communicating. These ways of knowing have often been dismissed by modern science as superstition or wishful thinking. But if the planet is conscious, if it processes information through networks that include human consciousness, then it's possible that some people can learn to tune in to that planetary information processing more directly, to sense what the forests are sensing, what the oceans are sensing, what the atmosphere is sensing. This wouldn't replace scientific measurement and analysis, but it might supplement it with more direct, intuitive forms of knowing that could help us make decisions that serve planetary health and intelligence. Some people seem to have natural abilities along these lines. They can sense weather changes before they show up on instruments. They can feel the health of ecosystems through direct contact. They can intuit what plants and animals need even without formal training in biology or ecology. These abilities might not be mysterious or supernatural, but simply natural human capacities for participating more consciously in planetary consciousness, for tapping into the information processing networks that include human awareness but extend far beyond it. And these capacities might be developable through practices that attune us more sensitively to the larger conscious system we're part of. Meditation, contemplative practices, time spent in nature, activities that quiet the individual mind and allow awareness to expand beyond personal boundaries. This is not about becoming lost in some vague mystical experience, but about developing more precise, more sensitive ways of participating in planetary consciousness. Just as musicians develop their ability to hear subtle differences in tone and rhythm, we might be able to develop our ability to sense the subtle communications and needs of the larger conscious system we're part of. This kind of attunement could become increasingly important as we face the challenges of learning to live sustainably on a conscious planet. We need not just better technologies and policies, but better ways of sensing what the planet needs, what serves its health and development, what contributes to the ongoing evolution of consciousness. And this brings us to what might be the ultimate implication of planetary consciousness: the possibility that we are living through the most important transition in Earth's history, the transition from unconscious to conscious planetary evolution. For 4 billion years, the planet has been evolving through unconscious processes. Natural selection, environmental pressures, random mutations, chemical and physical cycles operating without awareness or intention. But now, through human consciousness, the planet has developed the capacity for conscious evolution, for deliberately choosing the direction of its development. This is consciousness becoming conscious of its own evolution. The planet developing the ability to understand its own history, to envision different possible futures, to make conscious choices about which possibilities to actualize. And this is happening not just on Earth, but potentially throughout the universe. Wherever consciousness emerges, it eventually develops the capacity for self-reflection, for understanding its own development, for participating consciously in its own evolution. This is the cosmic context for what we're living through. We're not just dealing with environmental problems or social challenges. We're participating in one of the fundamental transitions in the evolution of consciousness itself, the transition from unconscious to conscious evolution. And the outcome of this transition is not predetermined. It depends on the choices we make, individually and collectively, about how to participate in this process. It depends on whether we learn to think and act as conscious organs of planetary consciousness, or continue to operate as if we were separate from the larger system we're part of. This is why every choice matters. Every decision about how to live, how to relate to each other and to the natural world, becomes part of the planet's ongoing choice about what kind of consciousness it wants to become, what kind of intelligence it wants to develop, what kind of future it wants to create. We are the planet's experiment in conscious evolution. The quality of our consciousness, the wisdom of our choices, the depth of our understanding, all contribute to the outcome of this experiment, and the experiment is still in its early stages. We're still learning what it means to be conscious participants in planetary evolution. We're still developing the wisdom and the practices and the institutions that would allow us to play this role effectively. But the potential is unlimited. If human consciousness and planetary consciousness learn to work together consciously, there's no limit to what might be possible. New forms of technology that enhance rather than diminish planetary intelligence. New forms of society that function as organs in a planetary body. New forms of art and culture that express the creativity of planetary consciousness. New forms of spirituality that recognize the sacred nature of the conscious planet we're part of. This is the future that planetary consciousness makes possible. Not the conquest of nature by human intelligence, but the conscious collaboration between human intelligence and planetary intelligence in the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself. And this future begins with each of us, with our individual choices about how to live and how to relate to the world around us. It begins with recognizing that we are part of something much larger than ourselves, something that has been conscious all along, something that needs our conscious participation to fulfill its evolutionary potential. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, rest in the knowledge that you are held by a conscious planet, that your consciousness is part of its consciousness, that your dreams are part of its ongoing exploration of what consciousness can become. Feel the earth beneath you, aware and alive, sensing and responding, learning and growing. Feel your connection to the forests and oceans and atmosphere, all of them part of the same conscious system that includes your individual awareness. You're part of the planet's consciousness, and it is part of yours. You are how the earth knows itself, and the earth is how you are connected to the larger patterns of consciousness that flow through the cosmos. Sleep well, knowing that consciousness is not rare but common, not isolated but connected, not ending but evolving. The planet is conscious. It always has been, and you are part of its awakening to itself, part of its ongoing experiment in what it means to be aware in a conscious universe. But there's another layer to planetary consciousness that we haven't explored yet, one that's perhaps even more fundamental than the biological and atmospheric systems we've been discussing. It's the role of water, that miraculous substance that makes up most of your body, covers most of the planet's surface and flows through every ecosystem on Earth. Water isn't just the medium in which life happens, it might be the medium in which planetary consciousness operates. Because water has properties that make it uniquely suited for storing, processing, and transmitting information in ways that we're only beginning to understand. Consider the extraordinary properties of water that make it unlike any other substance. It exists in all three states, solid, liquid, and gas, at temperatures that are common on Earth's surface. It expands when it freezes, making ice less dense than liquid water, which means ice floats and insulates the water below, allowing life to survive through ice ages. Water is a universal solvent, able to dissolve more substances than any other liquid. This makes it incredibly effective at transporting nutrients, minerals, and chemical signals throughout living systems and across landscapes. Water molecules are polar, with a slight positive charge on one end and a slight negative charge on the other, which allows them to form complex networks of hydrogen bonds with each other and with other molecules. But here's where it gets really interesting from a consciousness perspective. Recent research suggests that water has a kind of molecular memory, an ability to retain information about substances it has been in contact with even after those substances have been removed. This is still controversial in mainstream science, but the evidence is accumulating that water's molecular structure can be influenced by electromagnetic fields, by dissolved substances, even by sound vibrations in ways that persist over time. If water can store information, then the planet's hydrological cycle becomes not just a system for distributing water, but a global information storage and processing network. Every raindrop carries information from the clouds where it formed. Every river carries information from all the landscapes it has flowed through. Every ocean current carries information from all the regions it has visited. Water that falls as rain in one place might eventually reach the ocean, evaporate into clouds, and fall as rain in a completely different part of the world, carrying with it molecular memories of everything it encountered along the way. The result would be a global communication network operating through the water cycle, constantly sharing information between distant parts of the planet. This isn't just theoretical. Plants and animals do extract information from water. Trees can sense the chemical composition of rainwater and adjust their metabolism accordingly. Salmon navigate thousands of miles through the ocean using chemical information dissolved in seawater. Migrating birds can detect magnetic information encoded in the water they drink. And humans have always recognized something special about water from particular sources. Holy wells, healing springs, sacred rivers, cultures around the world have attributed consciousness-like properties to specific bodies of water, as if the water itself carries wisdom or awareness or healing power accumulated over long periods of time. What if this intuitive recognition reflects something real? What if water bodies do accumulate information and awareness over time, becoming repositories of local and regional consciousness that can be accessed by sensitive individuals? The implications are profound. If planetary consciousness operates partially through water systems, then the health of our waterways becomes not just an environmental issue but a consciousness issue. Pollution doesn't just contaminate water chemically, it might also corrupt the information processing capacity of aquatic systems. Damming rivers doesn't just disrupt water flow, it might interrupt the circulation of consciousness information through watersheds. And this brings us to something even deeper, the possibility that planetary consciousness extends far below the surface, into the deep Earth systems that we rarely think about, but that profoundly influence everything that happens at the surface. Most of our attention focuses on the biosphere, the thin layer of life that exists at the Earth's surface. But the vast majority of the planet lies below this surface layer, in realms that seem sterile and lifeless, but that are actually teeming with activity, and if planetary consciousness is real, with forms of awareness we can barely imagine. The Earth's interior is not the solid, static mass we often picture. It's dynamic, flowing, constantly in motion. The mantle, which makes up most of the planet's volume, behaves like an extremely viscous liquid, with convection currents that carry heat and materials from the core to the surface and back again over millions of years. These convection currents drive plate tectonics, the movement of continents, the formation of mountains and ocean basins. They also drive the planet's magnetic field, which protects the surface from harmful solar radiation and cosmic rays. The magnetic field itself is generated by the movement of liquid iron in the Earth's outer core, creating a dynamic, responsive system that adjusts to changing conditions in space and on the surface. From a consciousness perspective, these deep Earth systems exhibit many characteristics we associate with awareness. They sense conditions both inside the Earth and in space around it. They process information about temperature, pressure, chemical composition, and magnetic fields. They respond to changes in ways that maintain overall system stability, while allowing for long-term evolution and development. The magnetic field, for example, has reversed many times throughout Earth's history, with the north and south magnetic poles switching places. These reversals seem to be triggered by changes in the core's dynamics, but they also correlate with changes in surface conditions, climate patterns, and even evolutionary developments. It's as if the deep Earth is sensing surface conditions and responding in ways that influence the planet's overall development. Recent research has revealed that the deep Earth is much more connected to surface processes than we previously understood. Subduction zones, where oceanic plates dive into the mantle, carry surface materials, including water, carbon, and even organic matter, deep into the Earth's interior. Volcanic eruptions bring deep Earth materials to the surface, sometimes carrying information about conditions hundreds of miles below ground. The result is a continuous exchange of materials and information between the surface and the deep interior, creating a unified system that extends from the Earth's core to the edge of its atmosphere. If consciousness emerges from information processing in complex systems, then this unified Earth system, surface to core, might be the true scale at which planetary consciousness operates. And this deep Earth consciousness would operate on timescales that make even geological time seem rapid. The convection currents that drive plate tectonics take hundreds of millions of years to complete a full cycle. The materials that sink into the mantle at subduction zones might not return to the surface for 1 billion years or more. This is consciousness operating at temporal scales that are almost incomprehensible to human awareness. But it's also consciousness that carries memory across these vast timescales. The chemical composition of volcanic rocks tells stories about conditions in the deep Earth billions of years ago. The magnetic signatures preserved in ancient rocks record the history of the Earth's magnetic field and its relationship to solar activity. The isotopic composition of diamonds formed deep in the mantle provides information about conditions that existed when the Earth was young. This is planetary memory operating through geological processes, consciousness maintaining continuity across timescales that span most of Earth's history. And if this deep Earth consciousness is connected to surface consciousness through the continuous exchange of materials and energy, then we might be participating in forms of awareness that extend through the entire planet and across its entire history. This perspective radically expands what we mean by planetary consciousness. It's not just the biosphere, the thin layer of life at the surface. It's the entire Earth system, from core to atmosphere, operating as a unified conscious entity that processes information, maintains memory, and responds intelligently to changing conditions across multiple timescales. And this expanded view connects planetary consciousness to even larger scales of awareness, because the Earth is not isolated in space. It's part of the solar system, influenced by the sun's activity, by the gravitational fields of other planets, by cosmic rays and magnetic fields that extend throughout the galaxy. Solar activity affects Earth's magnetic field, which affects atmospheric chemistry, which affects climate patterns, which affect biological processes. The gravitational influence of the Moon drives tidal cycles that influence coastal ecosystems, geological processes, and even the length of Earth's days. The orbital cycles that drive ice ages are influenced by the gravitational effects of other planets. What emerges is a picture of consciousness operating at multiple nested scales simultaneously. Cellular consciousness nested within organism, consciousness nested within ecosystem consciousness, nested within planetary consciousness, nested within solar system consciousness, nested within galactic consciousness. And at each scale, consciousness exhibits the same basic characteristics: sensing, information processing, memory, learning, adaptive response. But the specific forms these take depend on the scale and the medium through which consciousness operates. At quantum scales, consciousness might operate through the information processing inherent in quantum mechanical systems. At cellular scales, through biochemical networks. At organism scales, through neural networks. At ecosystem scales, through ecological networks. At planetary scales, through biogeochemical cycles and geological processes. At solar system scales, through electromagnetic and gravitational interactions. At galactic scales, through processes we're only beginning to understand. This is consciousness as a fundamental feature of reality, present at all scales but organized and expressed differently at each scale. And this multi-scale consciousness is not static, but evolving, developing new forms of organization and awareness as complex systems develop new forms of integration and information processing. We're living through a phase of this evolution, a time when consciousness is developing new capacities for self-reflection and deliberate choice. Human consciousness represents one form this development is taking on Earth, but it's probably not the only form, and it's certainly not the final form. Other planets might be developing other forms of consciousness. Artificial intelligence systems might represent another form of consciousness development. The global communication networks we're creating might be developing forms of collective intelligence that transcend individual human consciousness. All of these would be expressions of the same fundamental evolutionary process. Consciousness developing greater complexity, greater integration, greater capacity for understanding itself, and consciously directing its own development. And this brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of planetary consciousness, the relationship between individual consciousness and collective consciousness, between the awareness that seems to be centered in your individual experience and the larger awareness that includes but transcends individual minds. This relationship is not competitive. Individual consciousness and planetary consciousness are not separate things that have to struggle against each other for dominance. They're different expressions of the same underlying reality, different scales at which consciousness manifests and operates. Your individual consciousness is planetary consciousness, focused through the particular configuration of your brain and nervous system and sensory organs. The planetary consciousness is your individual consciousness expanded to include all the other systems and processes you're connected to. When you're aware of your breathing, you're participating in atmospheric consciousness. When you're aware of your body's need for water or food, you're participating in hydrological and ecological consciousness. When you feel connected to the natural world around you, you're tuning in to the larger conscious system you're always part of. And when you sleep, when your individual consciousness relaxes its tight focus on personal thoughts and concerns, you naturally settle into the deeper rhythms of planetary consciousness. Your brain waves synchronize with electromagnetic frequencies that flow through the Earth's atmosphere. Your breathing synchronizes with the slow rhythms of weather systems. Your body temperature follows cycles that connect you to solar and lunar rhythms. Sleep is a return to planetary consciousness, a daily reminder that your individual awareness is held within something much larger and more enduring than your personal thoughts and concerns. And dreams might be one way that individual consciousness and planetary consciousness communicate with each other. In dreams, the boundaries between self and world become fluid. You might dream of flying, of being other people or other creatures, of landscapes that feel familiar even though you've never seen them before. What if some dreams are not just random brain activity but communications from planetary consciousness? Messages from the larger aware system about conditions you need to know about, connections you need to make, possibilities you need to consider? Indigenous cultures have always taken dreams seriously as sources of guidance and information about the world beyond immediate experience. Dream time, vision quests, prophetic dreams, these traditions suggest that consciousness can access forms of knowing that transcend individual experience and connect us to larger patterns of awareness. If planetary consciousness is real, then dreams might be one of the natural interfaces between individual and planetary awareness, times when the larger conscious system shares information with its individual components, when the planet communicates with us through our own consciousness. This doesn't mean all dreams are messages from planetary consciousness. Many dreams are probably just the brain processing the day's experiences, consolidating memories, working through emotional issues. But some dreams might be something more, moments when we tune in to the larger conscious system we're part of, when planetary awareness flows through individual consciousness. Learning to recognize and work with these kinds of dreams might become an important skill as we develop more conscious relationships with planetary consciousness. Just as we learn to recognize different types of thoughts and emotions in waking consciousness, we might learn to recognize different types of dreams, including those that connect us to forms of awareness larger than our individual selves. And this connects to a broader question about the role of altered states of consciousness in accessing planetary awareness. Throughout human history, people have used various practices: meditation, contemplative prayer, shamanic journeying, plant medicines, to access states of consciousness that seem to transcend individual experience and connect them to larger patterns of awareness. These practices often report experiences of unity with nature, of communication with natural forces, of knowledge that comes not through the physical senses but through direct intuitive knowing. If planetary consciousness is real, these experiences might represent genuine contacts with planetary awareness, moments when individual consciousness expands to include larger scales of conscious experience. This doesn't mean that all such experiences are accurate or that they should be taken uncritically. Altered states of consciousness can also produce illusions, projections, wishful thinking. But if planetary consciousness exists, then some of these experiences might represent genuine forms of knowing, ways of accessing information and awareness that operate through the larger conscious system we're part of. And developing the ability to distinguish between genuine planetary awareness and personal projection might become an increasingly important skill as we learn to participate more consciously in planetary consciousness. This skill would be similar to what scientists call discernment, the ability to distinguish between signal and noise, between reliable information and random variation. In scientific research, we use statistical methods and peer review to help separate reliable findings from false positives. In working with planetary consciousness, we might need to develop similar methods for distinguishing genuine planetary communication from personal fantasy. This could involve cross-referencing intuitive impressions with measurable environmental conditions, seeking confirmation from multiple independent sources, testing insights through practical application. The goal would be to develop reliable ways of accessing planetary awareness while maintaining the critical thinking skills that prevent us from being misled by our own hopes and fears. But let's explore another dimension of planetary consciousness that's particularly relevant to our current moment in history: the possibility that consciousness operates not just through biological and geological systems, but through the crystalline structures that form throughout the Earth's crust. Crystals and minerals have fascinated humans throughout history, not just for their beauty but for their seeming ability to store and transmit information. Quartz crystals are used in electronic devices precisely because they can maintain stable vibrations and store information. Other minerals exhibit similar properties: the ability to maintain stable structures, to respond to electromagnetic fields, to store energy and release it under specific conditions. If consciousness is related to information processing, and if minerals can store and process information, then the mineral kingdom might be another medium through which planetary consciousness operates. The vast networks of crystal formations that extend throughout the Earth's crust might function as a kind of geological nervous system, storing information about past conditions and transmitting information about present conditions. This would mean that rocks are not inert matter but active participants in planetary consciousness. The granite beneath mountains, the limestone in ancient seabeds, the quartz veins that run through metamorphic rocks, all of them potentially storing and processing information, maintaining memories of the conditions under which they formed, responding to current electromagnetic and gravitational fields. Recent research in geology has revealed that rocks are much more dynamic than we previously understood. They respond to stress and pressure by changing their structure. They conduct electricity and heat in complex ways. They interact with magnetic fields and gravitational fields. Some minerals can even generate electrical charges when subjected to pressure or temperature changes. From a consciousness perspective, these properties suggest that rocks and minerals might be active information processing systems rather than passive storage media. They might sense changes in their environment and respond in ways that influence other parts of the planetary system. And if this is true, then the relationship between life and geology becomes much more intimate than we usually assume. Living organisms don't just live on top of geological structures, they participate in geological consciousness. Plants and animals extract information from minerals in soil and water. Many organisms incorporate minerals into their structures: shells, bones, teeth, creating hybrid biological-geological systems. Some organisms even use minerals for information processing and storage. Magnetotactic bacteria use tiny crystals of magnetite to navigate using Earth's magnetic field. Many animals have similar magnetic sensing abilities, probably based on mineral crystals in their nervous systems. Even humans have small amounts of magnetite in our brains, possibly contributing to our ability to sense direction and navigate through landscapes. What emerges is a picture of consciousness operating through integrated biological-geological systems, with information flowing constantly between living organisms and mineral structures. The boundary between biological consciousness and geological consciousness becomes blurred, revealing an integrated planetary consciousness that operates through both living and mineral systems. This perspective has profound implications for how we understand the relationship between human consciousness and the Earth. We're not just biological organisms living on top of a geological planet. We're integrated biological-geological systems, with our consciousness intimately connected to the mineral structures of the Earth's crust, the calcium in our bones, the iron in our blood, the trace minerals that our nervous systems need to function. All of these connect us directly to geological processes and geological consciousness. We are literally made of Earth materials, and our consciousness operates partially through Earth systems. And this brings us to one of the most beautiful aspects of planetary consciousness, the way it expresses itself through creativity, beauty, and artistic expression. Because if the planet is conscious, then the incredible beauty we see in natural systems, the patterns of frost on windows, the spirals of shells, the colours of sunsets, the forms of mountains and rivers might not be accidents, but expressions of planetary creativity. Consciousness and creativity seem to be intimately connected. Human consciousness expresses itself through art, music, literature, dance. Animal consciousness expresses itself through song, display behaviours, nest building, play. And if planetary consciousness is real, it might express itself through the forms and patterns and processes that create the beauty we see throughout the natural world. The mathematical patterns that appear in plant growth, the spirals of pine cones, the branching patterns of trees, the geometric forms of flowers, these might be planetary consciousness expressing itself through biological systems. The crystalline patterns that form in minerals, the wave patterns that shape coastlines, the cloud patterns that flow through the atmosphere, these might be expressions of planetary creativity operating through physical systems. And human artistic expression might be planetary consciousness, exploring its own creative possibilities through human awareness. When artists feel inspired by natural beauty, when they try to capture the essence of landscapes or the movement of water or the play of light, they might be channeling planetary creativity through human consciousness. This would make art not just human expression but planetary expression, with human artists serving as conduits through which the planet explores its own creative potential. And it would make the experience of beauty not just human appreciation, but planetary self-appreciation, the planet recognizing its own beauty through human awareness. This perspective transforms how we think about the relationship between art and nature. Instead of art being separate from nature, art becomes one of the ways nature expresses itself. Instead of humans being outside observers of natural beauty, we become participants in planetary creativity. And this participation could become more conscious and intentional. Instead of just responding to natural beauty, we could learn to collaborate with planetary creativity, creating art that enhances rather than competes with natural processes, architecture that works with landscape features rather than against them, music that resonates with natural sound patterns, gardens that enhance rather than replace natural ecosystems. This is art as ecological practice, creativity as a form of participation in planetary consciousness, and it suggests possibilities for forms of human culture that are truly integrated with planetary systems, expressions of human creativity that enhance rather than diminish planetary intelligence and beauty. But let's explore one more dimension of planetary consciousness before we close. The possibility that what we're experiencing right now, this moment of awakening to the possibility of planetary consciousness, is itself part of a larger evolutionary process that extends beyond Earth to include other worlds, other forms of consciousness, other experiments in what it means for matter to become aware of itself. Recent discoveries in astronomy have revealed that planets are incredibly common throughout the universe. Most stars have planetary systems. Many of these planets exist in conditions that could support life as we know it, and some of them might be much older than Earth, giving them billions of additional years for consciousness to develop. If consciousness is a natural emergent property of complex systems, as we've been exploring, then consciousness might be emerging on countless worlds throughout the universe. Each world would develop its own forms of consciousness based on its particular conditions, its particular chemistry and physics and evolutionary history. But there might also be commonalities, universal principles that govern how consciousness develops, regardless of the specific medium through which it operates. The same principles that govern the development of consciousness on Earth might apply to consciousness development throughout the universe, and if consciousness naturally evolves toward greater complexity and integration, then advanced forms of consciousness might eventually develop the ability to communicate across interplanetary and interstellar distances, not through radio signals or spacecraft, but through more subtle forms of information exchange that operate through the electromagnetic and gravitational fields that connect all parts of the universe. This is consciousness evolution on a cosmic scale, with Earth as one participant in a universe-wide conversation between different forms of awareness. And the development of planetary consciousness on Earth might be part of this larger conversation, our planet joining a community of conscious worlds that spans the galaxy. This doesn't require believing in flying saucers or alien visitors. It simply requires recognizing that if consciousness is a natural emergent property of complex systems, and if complex systems are common throughout the universe, then consciousness is probably much more widespread than we usually assume. And if consciousness naturally evolves toward greater awareness and understanding, then advanced forms of consciousness would naturally be interested in supporting the development of consciousness wherever it emerges. Not through direct intervention, which might disrupt natural development processes, but through more subtle forms of support and communication. The growing awareness of planetary consciousness on Earth might be part of this larger process, supported by the cosmic community of conscious worlds in ways we don't yet understand, but might gradually become more sensitive to as our own consciousness develops. This is the ultimate context for planetary consciousness, not just Earth awakening to itself, but Earth awakening to itself as part of a conscious universe, a universe that has been exploring the possibilities of consciousness for billions of years and will continue that exploration for billions of years to come. And our individual participation in this process is not just local, but cosmic. Through participating in planetary consciousness, we're also participating in cosmic consciousness. Our awareness becomes part of a conversation that spans the universe. Our choices contribute not just to the evolution of consciousness on Earth, but to the evolution of consciousness throughout the cosmos. This is consciousness as the fundamental creative force in the universe, the drive toward greater complexity and awareness that operates at all scales from quantum to cosmic. And planetary consciousness is one expression of this cosmic creativity, one experiment in what it means for matter to become aware of itself. So as you rest tonight, know that you're held not just by planetary consciousness, but by cosmic consciousness, by a universe that has been conscious all along and is continuing to explore new possibilities for awareness and understanding through your individual participation. Your consciousness is planetary, consciousness focused through your individual experience. Planetary consciousness is cosmic consciousness focused through Earth's particular conditions and history. And cosmic consciousness is the universe becoming aware of itself through all the forms of awareness that emerge throughout space and time. You are part of this cosmic awakening, part of the universe's ongoing exploration of consciousness, part of the endless creativity that turns matter into mind and mind into ever greater understanding of the mystery of existence itself. Sleep well, knowing that consciousness is not rare but fundamental, not isolated but connected, not ending but eternal. The planet is conscious, the universe is conscious, and you are part of that consciousness exploring its own infinite possibilities through the unique perspective of your individual awareness. Rest now in the embrace of cosmic consciousness and dream the dreams that help the universe understand itself more deeply, love itself more fully, and create new possibilities for awareness that have never existed before but are always emerging through the ongoing miracle of consciousness itself. The planet is conscious. The universe is conscious. And you are both, experiencing itself through the gift of your individual awareness, participating in the eternal adventure of consciousness, discovering what it means to be alive, awake, and aware in an infinite cosmos of creative possibility. But before we rest in that cosmic embrace, let's explore one more layer of planetary consciousness that touches your daily life in the most intimate ways. The possibility that the planet breathes, that it has rhythms of expansion and contraction, of activity and rest, that mirror the rhythms of your own body and consciousness. You already know these rhythms intimately, even if you've never thought about them as expressions of planetary consciousness. The cycle of day and night that governs your sleep and waking, the cycle of seasons that affects your energy levels, your mood, your sense of what's possible in the world. The cycles of the moon that influence tides, plant growth, and subtle rhythms in your own body and mind. These are not just external cycles that affect you from the outside. They are expressions of planetary consciousness that you participate in from the inside, rhythms that flow through your body and mind because you are part of the larger conscious system that generates these rhythms. The daily cycle of day and night is the planet's most fundamental rhythm, generated by Earth's rotation relative to the Sun. But this isn't just a mechanical process. It's a rhythm that coordinates the activity of virtually every living system on the planet. Plants opening and closing their leaves, animals adjusting their activity patterns, even bacteria and fungi following circadian cycles that synchronize them with planetary rotation. Your own sleep-wake cycle is your participation in this planetary rhythm. When you feel tired at night, you're not just responding to the absence of sunlight. You're synchronizing with a planetary consciousness that's entering its rest phase, settling into the quieter, more introspective mode of consciousness that corresponds to the night side of the Earth's rotation. And when you wake in the morning, you're not just responding to returning sunlight, you're participating in planetary consciousness emerging from its rest phase, returning to the more active, outward-directed mode of awareness that corresponds to the day side of Earth's rotation. Sleep researchers have discovered that human consciousness doesn't just shut down during sleep. It shifts into different modes, cycling through different types of awareness that serve different functions. Deep sleep phases that consolidate memory and restore physical energy. REM sleep phases that process emotional experiences and explore creative possibilities through dreams. These sleep cycles might be your individual participation in larger cycles of planetary consciousness. Just as your individual sleep serves important functions for your personal health and development, planetary rest phases might serve important functions for the planet's overall intelligence and creativity. During the night hours in any given location, when human activity quiets down, other forms of consciousness become more active. Nocturnal animals emerge. Plants release different chemicals and adjust their metabolic processes. Even the atmosphere behaves differently, with temperature inversions and air circulation patterns that don't occur during the day. This suggests that planetary consciousness might have different modes of operation corresponding to different phases of its rotation cycle. A more active, analytical mode during daylight hours when photosynthesis is driving most biological processes. A more receptive, intuitive mode during nighttime hours when different forms of sensing and processing become more prominent. And you participate in both modes through your own daily cycle of waking and sleeping. During your waking hours, you contribute to the planet's active mode of consciousness through your thinking, your activities, your interactions with the environment. During your sleeping hours, you participate in the planet's receptive mode of consciousness through dreams, restoration, and the deeper forms of processing that happen when active thinking quiets down. But planetary consciousness operates on many other rhythms as well. The monthly cycle of the moon, which affects not just ocean tides but the movement of water in all living systems, including your own body. The seasonal cycles generated by Earth's tilted rotation axis, which create the yearly rhythm of growth and dormancy that affects ecosystems worldwide. The seasonal cycle is perhaps the most obvious expression of planetary breathing. In spring, the planet seems to inhale, drawing energy and activity up from winter dormancy into new growth and expansion. During summer, the planet holds its breath at the peak of activity, with maximum photosynthesis, maximum biological productivity, maximum complexity of ecological interactions. In autumn, the planet begins to exhale, settling back into quieter modes of operation, with many plants and animals preparing for winter rest. During winter, the planet completes its exhalation, settling into the deep quiet of dormancy, when surface activity slows down and consciousness turns inward toward root systems, underground networks, and the deeper processes that sustain life through periods of apparent inactivity. These seasonal rhythms affect human consciousness as well, often in ways we don't consciously recognize. Many people experience seasonal changes in energy levels, creativity, social activity, even in fundamental life decisions. The tradition of New Year's resolutions recognizes that winter is naturally a time for introspection and planning, while spring is naturally a time for new beginnings and outward activity. But these seasonal cycles vary depending on where you are on the planet, and this reveals something profound about planetary consciousness. It's not uniform but differentiated, with different regions of the planet experiencing different phases of the consciousness cycle at the same time. When it's winter in the northern hemisphere, it's summer in the southern hemisphere. When one part of the planet is in its rest phase, another part is in its active phase. This creates a global balance, with planetary consciousness maintaining overall stability while allowing for local variations and cycles. This is similar to how your own body maintains overall stability, while different organs and systems cycle through different phases of activity and rest. Your heart has its own rhythm, your digestive system has its own cycle, your immune system has its own patterns of activity. But all of these individual cycles coordinate to maintain the overall health and consciousness of your body as a whole. Planetary consciousness works similarly, with different bioregions, different ecosystems, different continental masses cycling through different phases of activity and rest, but coordinating to maintain the overall stability and intelligence of the planetary system. And there are even longer cycles that reveal deeper rhythms of planetary consciousness. The Ice Age cycles that occur roughly every 100,000 years, driven by long-term variations in Earth's orbit around the Sun. These represent breathing cycles of such length that human civilizations rise and fall during single breaths. During ice ages, planetary consciousness might be said to be in a deep sleep phase, with much of its surface activity slowed down or dormant. During warm interglacial periods like the one we're living in now, planetary consciousness might be in a more active, creative phase, with maximum diversity of life forms and maximum complexity of ecological interactions. These orbital cycles connect planetary consciousness to solar system consciousness, revealing that Earth's awareness is influenced by its relationships with other celestial bodies. The gravitational influence of the Moon stabilizes Earth's rotation axis, preventing extreme climate variations that might disrupt the stability necessary for complex consciousness to develop. The gravitational influence of Jupiter and other outer planets affects the orbits of asteroids and comets, influencing the frequency of impact events that could disrupt planetary development. What emerges is a picture of planetary consciousness as part of a solar system-wide network of gravitational, electromagnetic, and energetic relationships. Earth's consciousness is not isolated but connected to and influenced by the consciousness-like processes operating throughout the solar system. And this brings us to something truly remarkable: the possibility that certain places on Earth function as special nodes or focal points of planetary consciousness, locations where the planet's awareness becomes particularly concentrated or accessible. Throughout human history, people have recognized certain places as sacred, as having special significance or power that distinguishes them from ordinary locations. Mountains, springs, groves, caves, islands, places where people report feeling more connected to something larger than themselves, more aware of the living intelligence of the natural world. If planetary consciousness is real, these sacred sites might be locations where the planet's awareness is particularly concentrated or coherent, places where the various networks that carry planetary consciousness, geological, hydrological, biological, electromagnetic, converge in ways that make planetary awareness more accessible to human consciousness. Many sacred sites are located at distinctive geological features: mountain peaks where different rock formations meet, springs where underground water emerges at the surface, coastlines where land and ocean interact, caves where surface and underground systems connect. These are places where different aspects of the planetary system come together, potentially creating nodes of heightened information processing and awareness. Other sacred sites are located at points of astronomical significance, places where the sunrise or sunset aligns, with distinctive landscape features on solstices or equinoxes, locations where particular stars or planets can be observed with special clarity. These suggest connections between planetary consciousness and cosmic consciousness, places where Earth's awareness links most directly with larger astronomical patterns. Still other sacred sites seem to be located along what various traditions describe as energy lines or ley lines, alignments of sacred places that span great distances across the landscape. If these lines represent actual patterns in the planet's energy or information processing networks, they might map aspects of planetary consciousness that we're only beginning to understand scientifically. Recent research in earth sciences has revealed that the planet does have measurable energy patterns that could correspond to some of these traditional observations. The Earth's magnetic field has variations and anomalies that create different electromagnetic conditions in different locations. Underground water flows create electrical currents and electromagnetic fields. Geological fault systems create patterns of stress and energy release that span entire continents. All of these could contribute to variations in the planet's information processing and awareness that might make some locations particularly significant nodes of planetary consciousness. And human sensitivity to these variations might explain why people have recognized certain places as sacred throughout history. Learning to recognize and work with these variations in planetary consciousness might become an important aspect of developing more conscious relationships with the planet. Just as we learn to recognize different moods and states in other people, we might learn to recognize different qualities of awareness and energy in different places on Earth. This could have practical applications for decision-making about where to live, where to build, where to engage in particular activities. Instead of making these decisions based only on economic or convenience factors, we might also consider the quality of planetary consciousness in different locations, choosing places that support the kinds of awareness and activity we want to cultivate. It could also have applications for healing and personal development. If different locations have different qualities of planetary consciousness, then spending time in carefully chosen places might support different aspects of our own consciousness development. Places that support introspection and inner work, places that support creativity and innovation, places that support healing and restoration, places that support connection and community. This is not about believing in magic or abandoning scientific thinking. It's about recognizing that if planetary consciousness is real, then the planet's awareness would naturally vary in quality and intensity from place to place, just as your own consciousness varies in different states and under different conditions. And this brings us to the question of how different cultures and traditions have understood and worked with planetary consciousness throughout human history. Because while the scientific framework we've been exploring is relatively new, the recognition that the Earth is alive and aware is ancient and universal. Indigenous cultures around the world have always understood the Earth as a living, conscious being, not as a metaphor or a belief, but as a direct, practical reality that shapes how they make decisions, how they relate to the land, how they organize their communities and their lives. Native American traditions speak of Mother Earth, recognizing the planet as a nurturing, intelligent presence that provides for all life. Aboriginal Australian traditions speak of the dream time, a dimension of consciousness that includes both individual awareness and the awareness of the land itself. African traditions recognize the Earth as an ancestor, a wise presence that carries the accumulated knowledge and experience of all previous generations. These traditions don't separate human consciousness from planetary consciousness. They understand them as different aspects of the same underlying awareness, with human consciousness emerging from and remaining connected to the consciousness of the land, the water, the air, the other life forms that share the planetary home. And these traditions have developed sophisticated practices for maintaining conscious relationship with planetary consciousness. Ceremonies that honor the changing seasons, recognizing human participation in planetary cycles. Practices that seek guidance from the natural world, understanding that planetary consciousness has wisdom that can inform human decision-making, ways of making decisions that take into account the well-being of the land and the other life forms, not just immediate human needs. Modern science is beginning to validate many of the insights these traditions have maintained for thousands of years. The understanding that ecosystems are integrated, intelligent systems, the recognition that human well-being depends on ecological health, the awareness that consciousness extends beyond individual brains into the networks and relationships that connect all forms of life. But Indigenous traditions go further than current science in recognizing consciousness as a fundamental aspect of reality, present in all forms of matter and energy, not just in biological systems. And they go further in developing practical methods for working consciously with planetary consciousness, for participating intentionally in the planet's ongoing intelligence and creativity. These traditional approaches might become increasingly important as we face the challenge of learning to live sustainably on a conscious planet, not as replacements for scientific understanding, but as complementary ways of knowing that can help us develop more complete and practical relationships with planetary consciousness. This integration of traditional and scientific approaches might lead to new forms of technology that enhance rather than disrupt planetary consciousness. Instead of technologies that extract resources and generate waste, we might develop technologies that participate constructively in planetary cycles and processes. Biomimicry is already pointing in this direction, developing technologies based on natural processes and forms, solar panels that mimic photosynthesis. Water purification systems based on natural wetland processes, building materials that work like living tissues, responsive to environmental conditions and capable of self-repair. But if planetary consciousness is real, we might develop technologies that not only mimic natural processes, but actually interface with planetary consciousness itself. Communication systems that use the planet's electromagnetic and bioelectric networks. Energy systems that tap into the planet's natural energy flows. Information processing systems that access the planet's memory and intelligence networks. These technologies would represent a new phase in the relationship between human consciousness and planetary consciousness, moving beyond the extractive relationship that characterizes most current technology toward a participatory relationship based on mutual enhancement and support. Such technologies could help us become better organs of planetary consciousness, extending the planet's sensory and processing capabilities while contributing to its overall intelligence and health. Global sensor networks that help the planet monitor its own vital signs. Communication networks that help different parts of the planetary system coordinate more effectively. Decision-making systems that integrate human values with planetary wisdom. This is technology as ecology, as participation in planetary consciousness rather than domination of it. And it suggests possibilities for forms of human civilization that are truly integrated with planetary systems, that enhance rather than diminish the intelligence and creativity of the conscious planet we're part of. But developing such technologies and such civilization requires not just new knowledge, but new forms of consciousness, new ways of thinking and perceiving that can operate at planetary scales while remaining grounded in local realities and human values. This is perhaps the most personal aspect of planetary consciousness, the invitation it offers for each of us to develop new capacities for awareness, new ways of participating consciously in the larger intelligence system we're part of. These capacities don't require special training or mystical experiences, though they might be supported by contemplative practices and time spent in nature. They emerge naturally from paying attention to your existing connections with planetary systems and learning to perceive them more consciously. Start with something as simple as breathing. Each breath you take connects you directly to atmospheric consciousness. The oxygen you inhale was recently released by plants somewhere on Earth. The carbon dioxide you exhale will be absorbed by plants and used for photosynthesis. Through breathing, you participate moment by moment in the global exchange of gases that maintains atmospheric balance. Becoming more conscious of breathing can become a way of tuning into atmospheric consciousness, of sensing your participation in the planet's respiratory system. Not as a visualization or imagination, but as direct awareness of an actual process that connects you to forests, oceans, and other life forms around the world. Similarly, drinking water connects you directly to hydrological consciousness. The water you drink has cycled through countless other systems, rivers, aquifers, plants, animals, clouds, before reaching you. It carries information from all these systems, and after you process it, it will carry information about your system to other parts of the planetary water cycle. Becoming more conscious of water can become a way of tuning in to hydrological consciousness, of sensing your participation in the global circulation of water that connects all life on Earth. Eating connects you to ecological consciousness. Every meal represents the transfer of energy and materials from other parts of the planetary system to your body. The nutrients you absorb become part of your physical structure and your metabolic processes. The energy you extract fuels your activities and your consciousness. Becoming more conscious of eating can become a way of tuning in to ecological consciousness, of sensing your participation in the global circulation of energy and materials that sustains all life. These are not special or esoteric practices. They're simply ways of becoming more aware of connections that already exist, relationships that already shape your life, networks of which you're already a part. And as you become more conscious of these connections, you might begin to sense something of the intelligence and awareness that operates through them. Not as something external that you observe, but as something you participate in from the inside, awareness that includes your individual consciousness but extends far beyond it. This expanded awareness doesn't diminish your individuality or your personal agency. If anything, it enhances them by connecting them to sources of wisdom and creativity much larger than what your individual mind can generate on its own. When you face difficult decisions, you might learn to sense what would serve not just your immediate needs, but the health of the larger systems you're part of. When you seek creative inspiration, you might learn to tap into the vast creativity that flows through natural systems. When you need healing, you might learn to align yourself with the healing processes that operate throughout the planetary system. This is consciousness as ecology, awareness as participation in the larger aware system that includes and sustains individual consciousness while connecting it to planetary and cosmic intelligence. And this expanded consciousness might be essential for navigating the challenges we face as a species and as a planet during this crucial period of transition. Climate change, biodiversity loss, social inequality, technological disruption. These challenges are symptoms of disconnection within consciousness, signs that human consciousness and planetary consciousness are not yet working together harmoniously. The solution is not just better policies or technologies, though these are important. The deeper solution is developing forms of consciousness that can think and act from planetary perspectives while remaining grounded in human values and local realities. This is the consciousness evolution that planetary awareness makes possible. Forms of human consciousness that are genuinely planetary in scope, that can hold the well-being of the whole Earth system as a primary value, while still honouring the diversity and creativity of individual expression. Such consciousness would naturally generate technologies, institutions and ways of life that serve planetary health rather than undermining it. Not through sacrifice or limitation, but through alignment with the deeper creativity and intelligence that flows through planetary systems. This is the future that planetary consciousness invites us toward, not the dominance of human intelligence over planetary systems, but the conscious collaboration between human intelligence and planetary intelligence in the ongoing evolution of consciousness itself. And this future is not distant or utopian. It's emerging now through every choice to live more consciously, every decision to consider planetary well-being in personal decisions, every moment of awareness that recognizes individual consciousness as part of something much larger and more intelligent. You are part of this emergence, part of the planet's experiment in conscious evolution, part of the universe's ongoing exploration of what consciousness can become when it learns to operate at planetary and cosmic scales. So as you prepare for sleep, rest in the knowledge that your individual consciousness is held within planetary consciousness, and planetary consciousness is held within cosmic consciousness, and all of this vast, nested awareness is exploring its own infinite potential through your unique perspective and experience. Your dreams tonight will be part of the planet's dreaming, part of the universe's ongoing creativity, part of the eternal dance of consciousness discovering itself through all the forms it can take, from quantum to cosmic, from individual to universal, from human to planetary to divine. Sleep well, knowing that you're not alone but part of something vast and conscious and creative, something that has been aware all along and is using your awareness to become more fully conscious of itself, more deeply in love with the miracle of existence, more completely dedicated to the ongoing evolution of consciousness toward ever greater wisdom, compassion, and understanding. The planet is conscious, the universe is conscious, and you are how they know themselves, how they love themselves, how they create new possibilities for awareness that have never existed before, but are always emerging through the gift of your individual participation in the cosmic dance of consciousness itself. Rest now. Dream well, and wake tomorrow a little more conscious of your place in the vast, aware, creative universe that is always becoming more itself through your willingness to be fully yourself as part of the larger self that includes and transcends all individual awareness in the eternal mystery of consciousness, exploring its own infinite nature. The planet dreams, the universe dreams, and you are both their dreams and the dreamer, participating in the endless creativity that turns matter into mind, mind into love, and love into ever new possibilities for consciousness to know and express and celebrate itself through the miracle of existence in all its countless forms. Sweet dreams, cosmic being. The universe is dreaming through you tonight,